You're watching the Daily Climate Show on Sky News. Coming up on today's programme, a warning: the climate crisis is making the housing emergency worse as extreme weather events become more common. Flying taxis, alternative protein and fusion power. The UK-based sustainable startups encouraging a record level of investment. And restoring wildlife habitats and cutting carbon emissions. The pact covering more than a third of England's land to tackle the climate and nature crises. Hello and welcome to the UK's only daily climate news show, where we track the changes happening to our world right now and challenge those coming up with the solutions. Now, we're starting this evening with a warning that those who are homeless and in poor housing are at increasing risk from the climate crisis. According to 3 leading charities, that's because those sleeping rough are more affected by extreme weather events such as flooding and heat waves, while the growing cost of energy means that some are having to choose between heating their homes or paying their rent. Well, let's get more on this now with Alistair Harper, who's Head of Public Affairs at the housing charity Shelter. Good evening to you, Alistair Harper. So tell us, just how serious is this situation? How is climate change affecting homeless people in this country right now?
Well, unfortunately, what we're seeing right now is that the climate emergency is here. We're on the front line. The front line is our front door. And what the reality means is that the climate emergency has come hand in hand with a pre-existing housing emergency, where the homes that we have, for far too many in this country, are just not adequately equipped as it stands to keep warm in, to keep dry and to keep safe in. Costs are spiralling of fossil fuel energy costs, and that's before we factor in these extreme weathers events that we've been seeing over the last year. It's frustrating because we knew that this would come. Our allies in the global south warned that these extreme events have been what they have been experiencing for a very long time. And they also warned us that it would be the most vulnerable that faced the most pain. The people who did the least to cause this emergency face the most pain. So if you're in a home and it's hard to keep warm, it's going to get harder at present until we sort out our buildings. And that's if you're fortunate to have a home. For people who are on the streets, winter's always hard, but we're seeing right now with Arctic blasts like we're facing just how impossible it is to stay safe as our climate deteriorates.
The government would say, wouldn't they, that they're investing over £12 billion over the next 5 years in affordable housing. They also will say they're spending more than £2 billion to tackle rough sleeping and homelessness. So what more do you want the government to do?
Well, first of all, let's take the crisis right now in front of us, of the people still on the streets this winter facing this Arctic blast. We need clear guidance from the government that everyone should be allowed in and looked after by their council as they face this emergency, and funding to back it. But in the long term, we know this isn't going away, and too many people are in bad housing. Too many people are in an unregulated, bloated, private rented sector that is exploiting the people of this country as it is today, never mind when we've got extreme weather that is impossible to manage. So we need government investment in the actual quality, secure, safe homes that we need in this country. And that means instead of losing 20,000 social homes a year, we actually start to build it back. And that for us is actually the opportunity, because we could show what quality safe housing means by doing a pilot of net zero social housing across every town in the country, give people the sign that they need, that housing can be better, can be more affordable, can be safer, and show off the technologies we need to tackle the climate emergency.
Alistair Harper, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
Now, let's take a look at some of the day's other climate news now. And Indonesia is preparing to launch a carbon tax to help curb emissions and reach net zero by 2060. It means that companies will be charged £1.60 for every tonne of greenhouse gases emitted from coal-fired power plants. Around 1 million tonnes of taxable carbon emissions were emitted in Indonesia during a trial covering 32 of the fossil fuel plants. Nissan has announced plans to spend more than £13 billion on developing electric vehicles. The car manufacturer, which has a major plant in Sunderland, revealed it'll develop 23 new electric models by 2030. Electric car sales increased by 186% in 2020, and today there are an estimated 300,000 electric vehicles on the road in the UK. And a pact to restore wildlife habitats and cut carbon emissions has been signed by landowners and organisations in England. The Duchy of Cornwall has pledged to increase biodiversity across its estates by 30% by 2030, and Yorkshire Water will plant 1 million trees by 2028. The groups represent more than 10 million acres of land, around a third of England. Now, UK start-up tech companies, which focus on areas including the environment and sustainable development, have raised more than £2 billion of investment so far this year. That's according to the government. Now, that's a record amount for impact start-ups, which are companies founded to build solutions to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, including health, security, climate change and energy scarcity. Well, the UK is now home to 12 impact unicorns. That's companies worth more than $1 billion in value. And many of these are focused on climate and environment issues. All of the tariffs for Octopus Energy, which is based in London, use 100% green electricity, and the company offers the option to carbon offset gas use, and they're also investing in renewable energy technology. British Volt in Blythe is working to accelerate the electrification of society with sustainable low-carbon batteries, which will mainly help power electric vehicles. And Depop is a London-based app connecting people to buy and sell clothes with the aim of making fashion less wasteful and more sustainable. And Vertical Aerospace is building zero-carbon, battery-powered flying taxis to help revolutionise sustainable aviation and how we get around in the future. Well, joining me now is Vertical Aerospace Chief Executive and Founder Stephen Fitzpatrick. So, welcome to you. Zero-carbon, battery-powered flying taxis. I mean, it sounds like it's something out of a futuristic film. Tell us more about them and how soon we might see them in the air.
Yes, good evening, and thanks for having me. So it does really sound quite futuristic. I know when people think about flying taxi, think about flying cars and cartoons like the Jetsons and everything being, decades and decades into the future. The wonderful thing about the technology we're using, it's been developed already over the last few decades, primarily in the car sector, the automotive sector. And so there's already these great industrial partners and supply chains ready to be taken over into aerospace. And so we're working with some of the UK's leading manufacturing and engineering groups. And UK consumers and passengers will be able to fly in these vehicles from 2024, 2025 onwards. So it sounds like it's, very futuristic, but actually it's just a few years away.
Well, yeah, and could the technology be used to transport larger numbers of people? I mean, aviation, a big area where we need to tackle emissions. Can it be expanded?
Yeah, so we're starting off, it'll be a piloted vehicle with 4 passengers. And very quickly, we're going to see that capacity increase to first 8 and then maybe 16 to 20 passengers per vehicle. We're working with battery powered only when we launch, but very quickly we'll be moving into a hybrid powertrain. In particular, hydrogen is something we're looking very closely at. And these are technologies that are being developed today. They will be ready within this decade. And the beautiful thing about the eVTOL, so there's electric vertical takeoff and landing, is that you don't need to travel, 10, 15, 20, even 50 miles to go to an airport. You're going to be able to depart and arrive much closer to your destination. So it's going to transform how we travel around cities. And if you think HS2 as a wonderful piece of engineering as it is an enormous expense that we are paying to create some ground infrastructure to help bring passengers from London to Birmingham in just under an hour. We're going to be able to do exactly the same journey at about the same cost without tens and tens of billions of pounds invested in the railway network because we're flying through the sky. So it is really going to transform how we travel around. It's zero carbon, as you've said, all electric. And as we start to look in longer range journeys, we're going to start to make real inroads into the fossil fuel-based aerospace sector. So a really exciting time in aviation, probably the most exciting time in aerospace since the dawn of the jet turbine.
And you're also the founder of the energy group OVO, aren't you? And we've learned today about this record amount that's being raised for so-called impact startups. What do you think about the UK as a place for a green startup? Is it a good place to be?
Well, I think there's a few things there. First of all, there is a real culture of environmental awareness in the UK. So there's a great backdrop there. There's a great culture of entrepreneurialism, in particular in the southwest of England, where OVO and Vertical are both based near Bristol, in Bristol. There's a lot, the big ecosystem there for impact investing or environmental investing. But I think the big challenge that we faced in the UK is not about environmental startups. We share in the green or the clean tech space some of the challenges we have elsewhere in the UK, which is about scaling up. We have one of the most entrepreneurial societies in the world, and more startups per million people in the UK than there are in the US. We have not historically done a really good job of creating global competitors and scaling those businesses up. And so that's the big challenge. And I think today's announcement is about companies that have really made it to scale. And behind them, there are countless others doing great work and investing in the future. So, I think the future looks really bright for the UK in terms of entrepreneurialism and investing in what is going to be one of the biggest growth sectors in the whole world in the coming years and decades. That's the decarbonization of our entire economy and society. So I think Britain's really well placed for that.
Stephen Fitzpatrick, interesting to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
Now, in the latest of our series of climate diaries, we're going to hear from Olivia Sweeney. Now, Olivia runs walking groups to engage diverse communities in conversations about climate action and air pollution. Here's her story.
I'm a Black and Green Ambassador, and that is a programme that's Bristol-based that explores the intersection of climate and racial justice. My project has been focused on the problem of dirty air. So in the UK and around the world, we have illegal levels of dirty air. And for me, I believe it's an issue of environmental justice. So those who contribute the least are suffering the most, and these are disproportionately members of the Black and Brown community. We put Black and Brown communities' voices at the forefront because it's these communities that are disproportionately affected by climate change. Yet unfortunately, it's these communities that have the least power and agency to affect change. It's about who you see within the movement. Greta Thunberg is great, but there's plenty of other young Black and Brown climate activists who are doing great work. So it makes you think whose voice and whose actions are more valued by society. Our work helps to tackle climate change by putting the role of ethnicity central to environmental discussions.
Do stay with us. Coming up after the break, I'll be joined by the climate activist Laura Young and organic farmer and Deputy President of the National Farmers Union, Stuart Roberts. And we're going to be discussing the role of clean tech in tackling climate change and asking what changes farmers need to be making in the way that they work.
The wind was like pulling us out of that little room. Mandatory evacuation, you must leave!
I'm Greg Milam, Sky's US correspondent here in Los Angeles. It is almost impossible to predict where these fires will go next. claim to be the best and most trusted place for news. This gives you an idea of the strength of those winds, strong enough to bend and twist metal. Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Will you respond to those who've made accusations, Sir Philip?
Can you go away?
I've seen the dark side of America. We are standing on the supply line right into the heart of America's opioid crisis. I've seen heartbreaking human stories.
There was a river of blood coming out of the mosque. That's a scene that you don't forget.
Christchurch has been changed forever by what happened here.
Did you know that driving us to school creates extra toxic air at drop-off and pick-up times?
There'll be a mostly cloudy morning with rain or drizzle likely, heaviest in the northwest. Southern and eastern parts have the best chance of some brightness. It'll be mild, but there'll be quite a chilly wind. Scotland, the far north of England, Ireland and Northern Ireland will turn wet and windy during the afternoon, although the rain will give way to showers in the west later. There'll be little change elsewhere. Westerly winds and generally unsettled conditions mean air pollution levels will be low, with the air quality index between 1 and 3.
The Air Quality Report, sponsored by Philips Air Purifiers.
Hello and welcome back to the Daily Climate Show on Sky News. Now we're getting straight to discussing the climate issues of the day now with climate activist Laura Young and organic farmer and Deputy President of the National Farmers Union, Stuart Roberts. So a very good evening to both of you. Nice to see you both. And first of all, the government announced today that UK startups focusing on sustainable technology have attracted more than £2 billion of investment this year, from renewable energy to carbon-free flying taxis. Innovation is helping drive that transition to net zero, but is it enough? Well, let's talk about this then. Laura Young, a record amount of money for these so-called impact startups. That's only got to be good news, hasn't it?
I think it is really great news that we're beginning to see so much investment in sustainable business. And I think it's important that we're beginning to move all sectors towards this. The one thing I worry about, though, when we talk about green tech is that we often try and think about how we can design our way out of the climate crisis, when often we need to also be having a conversation about less consumption and actually returning backwards to ways that are less damaging for the planet. I think some of the businesses that you mentioned earlier are great. I'm wearing some kind of secondhand fashion, so I know that's one I've benefited from myself, but I do worry when we think about flying taxis or more electric cars and more batteries, that we maybe miss a conversation of how we can make things like public transport more affordable and accessible, because that's just as important a climate solution as well as advancing in a technological way. And so I just really hope that some of the money also goes towards advancing tech-wise the systems that we already have, and not just thinking about new design solutions that are kind of really futuristic and fun.
Stuart Roberts, do you agree with that? Does there need to be more of a joined-up conversation and more of a focus on reducing consumption rather than relying on new whizzy tech ideas?
Yeah, I think, look, it's a combination of both. And for me, I see some really exciting technology solutions in agriculture, whether that be feed additives that can reduce methane, whether that be methane tractors or solar-powered robots to weed crops. I think that's all really exciting stuff. But for me, it's also about not just looking at tech to solve this. There's the consumption side, as Laura said, but it's also about looking at things like, particularly in agriculture, carbon sequestration. So how can we take that carbon out of the atmosphere through our soils, through our grassland? So tech, it can be exciting, it can be fun, but equally, it's not the sole solution.
But isn't there an issue, Laura, of keeping people on side? Some of these exciting, innovative ideas will allow people to carry on their lives as they were before, but in a greener way. Doesn't technology help them do that? And you've got to keep the public committed.
I would maybe worry that we're really struggling to actually live the way that we currently live at a sustainable rate. And I'm not really sure green tech will be the solution for that. Actually, I would love to see this investment into ways that we can do things in a more sustainable way and kind of returning back to some of the more simpler solutions. But we can also have some really fun tech solutions within the systems that we already have, instead of just trying to create new industries above the ones that we already have. And I think it's just about shifting that mindset. And although it might not be as fun, it's still possible, and it still allows for a lot of growth and a lot of economic growth as well.
And I'm just going to remind everyone of what John Kerry said, Stuart. He rather controversially said that 50% of the reductions we have to make by 2050 or 2045 are going to come from technologies we don't yet have. I mean, a lot of people disputed that figure. But do you think that governments are caught up with this idea of being over-reliant on technology as well?
Yeah, I think for me, it's about that balance. So I think technology will help us on that journey, absolutely. And I can see some areas in agriculture where there will be technology in future to solve things we don't even know about it yet. But some of it is also about looking at just how we do things. So for me, the classic is the hedgerow. We can sequester a lot more carbon in our hedgerows by managing them slightly different. They add to our landscape, but they're maybe not quite as sexy and exciting as some of the tech, but actually can have a as big, if not bigger, impact. And those are some of the areas we've got to spend equal amounts of resources and time on.
I've never thought of hedgerows as being sexy, but thank you for raising that possibility in my mind. And we're kind of sticking with that subject a little bit next, because we heard earlier in the programme about how the National Trust and other big landowners have signed a pact to restore wildlife habitats and cut carbon emissions. Now, the groups represent around a third of English land. So is this something that farmers can get behind? And how does the idea of improving biodiversity fit in with industrial-level agriculture? So, Stuart, clearly a question for you first of all. And about 70% of land in England is agricultural, isn't it? So is this something you think that farmers can get behind?
Well, I think it's something that farmers have already been behind, actually. When I go back to our 2040 net zero aspiration for agriculture 3-4 years ago now, we started that. I worry sometimes that we become one-dimensional. So actually we look at biodiversity, or we look at water quality, or we look at carbon, and then we'll sort of add food into it as well. For me, what farmers need to do going forward is deliver all of those things, produce fantastic foods, but also deliver on biodiversity, carbon, and everything else we expect.
But isn't that really hard, Stuart, if you're trying to make a profit and you've got to give over a load of your land to biodiversity?
So the key for me is about actually lots of these areas. There's a sweet spot where, by using our resources more efficiently, by thinking about how we use our land and which bits of land we use, we can absolutely deliver on food, on the environment, on biodiversity. Where I worry is actually this sort of wholesale, we'll just turn it all over to nature, we'll import our food from somewhere else in the world and actually just export our environmental footprint. British farmers want to do both those things, and I think is really exciting for the future.
Laura, how important are these nature-based solutions, and do you feel that farmers are doing enough?
think farmers are doing a lot, and you can see that through the various different initiatives that they have. I'm from Scotland, and it's really fun going all over the country and seeing the different solutions that farmers have. But I think one of the important things that we need to do is also support them in both the education and in the finance for doing some of these solutions, because they are the custodians of lots of the land that we have here in the UK, and we need to be supporting them because we are also their customers, and we really want to buy food that is being sustainably made. And so we can all be playing our part alongside them to help deliver these nature-based solutions for the land that we call home here in the UK.
Stuart, very briefly, do you sometimes feel like you're painted as the bad guys? Agriculture responsible for lots of methane emissions. Very briefly, does that feel like it to you?
Well, look, too often agriculture is seen as the problem, whereas I see it as absolutely part of the solution to biodiversity, to carbon, but also to producing fantastic food in a fantastic landscape. OK,
Stuart Roberts, Laura Young, really good to talk to you both. Thanks very much for joining us this evening. And that's everything from us for today. On tomorrow's show, I'll be joined by environmental lawyer Tessa Khan and Mike Berners-Lee, one of the country's leading experts in carbon footprinting. Do stay tuned, though. We've got Sky News Tonight coming up for you next, including COVID booster vaccines are going to be extended to everyone aged over 18 as 2 more cases of the Omicron variant of COVID-19 are detected in England. But that's it from me. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.